The Whitmore estate sprawled across manicured hills like a monument to old money, its Georgian columns gleaming under strategically placed spotlights. Tonight, it hosted the annual Children's Education Foundation Gala, a gathering where the city's elite could write tax-deductible checks while congratulating themselves on their philanthropy. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic rainbows across marble floors, and the soft clink of champagne glasses created a symphony of privilege. Maya Richardson stepped from her Tesla onto the circular driveway, her emerald silk gown catching the light like liquid fire. At 27, she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had earned every accolade: Harvard MBA, youngest VP at Richardson Tech, and tonight, the foundation's guest of honor. Yet as she approached the mansion's towering doors, that familiar knot formed in her stomach. The weight of representation pressed against her shoulders like an invisible cloak. She wasn't just Maya tonight. She was every Black woman who had fought for a seat at tables like this, every daughter whose success reflected on her entire community. The burden was exhausting, but she wore it with grace born from necessity. "Ms. Richardson, welcome." The hostess's smile stretched wide, professional and practiced. "We're so honored to have Richardson Tech as our platinum sponsor this year." Maya nodded graciously, stepping into the opulent foyer where conversations hummed like well-tuned engines. The guest list read like a who's who of corporate America: tech moguls, real estate dynasties, pharmaceutical heirs. She recognized faces from Forbes covers and society pages, people whose names graced hospital wings and university buildings. But as she moved through the crowd, Maya felt the subtle shift in energy that always accompanied her presence in spaces like this. Conversations paused for microseconds too long. Eyes lingered with curiosity that bordered on scrutiny. Smiles carried questions that would never be voiced aloud. "Maya Richardson? I'm Jennifer Walsh from Walsh Industries." A blonde woman in Chanel extended a manicured hand. "Your father's company has been making quite the splash in the tech world." "Thank you. We're proud of our innovation in sustainable technology." Maya's response was polished, automatic. "How wonderful that he's given you such opportunities," Jennifer continued, her tone carrying that particular inflection Maya knew well, the suggestion that her position was gift rather than achievement. The evening unfolded in a series of these carefully choreographed interactions. Compliments that felt like backhanded observations. Questions about her journey that implied surprise at her articulation. Assumptions wrapped in politeness, microaggressions disguised as curiosity. Maya navigated each exchange with practiced diplomacy, her smile never wavering even as her jaw tightened imperceptibly. She had learned long ago that in rooms like this, her composure was both armor and weapon. Every word, every gesture, every response would be analyzed and judged not just as Maya Richardson, but as a representative of everyone who looked like her. The champagne tasted expensive and hollow. The hollow taste of champagne still lingered on Maya's tongue when she found herself face to face with the evening's hosts. Charles Whitmore commanded attention without effort, silver-haired, broad-shouldered, wearing his wealth like a second skin. Beside him stood his wife Victoria, a woman whose beauty had been carefully preserved through decades of privilege, and their son Bradley, 30-something with the soft edges of someone who had never faced real adversity. "Ms. Richardson," Charles's voice boomed across the marble foyer. "The woman of the hour. Charles Whitmore, and this is my family, Victoria and Bradley." Maya extended her hand, noting how Charles's grip lingered a moment too long, his eyes scanning her with the calculating assessment of someone appraising livestock. Victoria's smile never reached her eyes, and Bradley's handshake felt deliberately limp, as if touching her required effort. "We're absolutely thrilled to have Richardson Tech supporting our cause," Victoria said, her voice carrying the practiced sweetness of someone accustomed to getting her way. "It's so refreshing to see companies embracing diversity initiatives these days." The word diversity hung in the air like smoke, loaded with implications Maya had heard countless times before. She wasn't a guest of honor. She was a checkbox, a symbol of progressive thinking that allowed them to feel enlightened while maintaining their comfortable distance. "Our commitment to education stems from genuine belief in equal opportunity," Maya replied carefully, her media training kicking in like muscle memory. Of course, Charles nodded, swirling his whiskey. Though I imagine having a father in the tech industry certainly opened doors for you. Family connections are everything in business, aren't they? The comment landed like a precision strike. Maya felt the familiar burn of having her achievements reduced to nepotism, her Harvard MBA and years of grinding work dismissed with casual cruelty. Around them, other guests continued their conversations, oblivious to the psychological warfare unfolding in polite society speak. "You're so articulate," Victoria added, her tone suggesting surprise. "Where did you grow up? I'm always curious about people's backgrounds." Bradley chuckled, a sound devoid of warmth. "Mothers fascinated by success stories, especially the unexpected ones." Maya's composure remained intact, but beneath the surface, old wounds reopened. She was 8 years old again, being told she was well-spoken for a black girl. She was 16, watching teachers express shock at her AP test scores. She was 22, enduring job interviews where her qualifications were questioned despite her transcript. "Education was always prioritized in our household," Maya said, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside. "How admirable," Charles said. "Though I suppose with affirmative action programs, opportunities are more accessible these days." The words hit like physical blows, each one carefully chosen to diminish her worth while maintaining plausible deniability. Maya's fingers tightened imperceptibly around her champagne flute, the crystal warming under her grip. She had spent her entire life proving she belonged in rooms like this, only to be reminded that some people would never see her as anything more than an interloper. The Whitmores exchanged glances, subtle, knowing looks that spoke of shared assumptions and comfortable prejudices. Maya realized with crystalline clarity that this wasn't accidental rudeness or social awkwardness. This was deliberate, systematic dehumanization wrapped in designer clothing and charitable giving. The foundation of her evening began to crack. The cracks in Maya's evening widened as she excused herself from the Whitmores, seeking refuge near the grand staircase where shadows offered temporary sanctuary. The marble steps curved upward like a frozen waterfall, their cold surface reflecting the chandelier's fractured light. She needed a moment to breathe, to rebuild the walls that their casual cruelty had begun to erode. But sanctuary proved elusive in a house built on exclusion. From the adjacent sitting room, Victoria's voice carried with the confidence of someone who believed herself unheard. Maya froze, her champagne flute halfway to her lips, as the words sliced through the ambient chatter like shards of glass. "Did you see that dress? Trying so hard to fit in, but you can't buy class, can you?" Victoria's laughter tinkled like breaking crystal. "All that new money, and she still looks like she's playing dress-up." Maya's breath caught in her throat. The sitting room's French doors stood slightly ajar, offering a perfect view of Victoria holding court among 5 other women, wives of CEOs, daughters of old money, guardians of social hierarchy. Their faces were animated with the cruel delight of predators circling wounded prey. "The father's probably some tech startup lucky break," added Margaret Ashford, her voice dripping with disdain. "These people always think money equals breeding." Bradley's voice joined the chorus, his tone a mocking imitation of Maya's careful diction. "Our commitment to education stems from genuine belief in equal opportunity," he mimicked, exaggerating her pronunciation with theatrical precision. "Please, she probably got into Harvard through some diversity quota." The women erupted in laughter, their amusement echoing off the silk-papered walls like gunshots. Maya stood paralyzed, watching through the crack in the doors as her humanity was dissected for entertainment. Her achievements, her intelligence, her very existence reduced to punchlines for people who had never earned anything beyond their birth certificates. "I heard she's the VP of something at Daddy's company," Victoria continued, her voice gaining momentum with each cruel observation. "Nepotism at its finest. Though I suppose they need someone to check their diversity boxes for board meetings. Does she actually think she belongs here?" Bradley gestured toward the main ballroom with theatrical disgust. "This is our world, our people. Some things can't be bought or borrowed." Maya's carefully constructed composure began to crumble like ancient parchment. 27 years of proving herself, of excelling beyond expectations, of carrying the weight of representation. All of it reduced to racist caricature by people who saw her as fundamentally less than human. The champagne flute trembled in her grip, the crystal singing a high, thin note of distress. Around the sitting room, other guests had gathered, drawn by the spectacle. Some laughed openly, their faces flushed with wine and complicity. Others stood silent, their discomfort evident but their courage absent. Maya recognized several faces: business leaders she had met at conferences, society figures who had smiled at her earlier in the evening. Now they watched her destruction with the passive fascination of spectators at a car accident. The realization hit her with devastating clarity. This wasn't spontaneous cruelty born of alcohol and poor judgment. This was systematic dehumanization, carefully orchestrated to remind her that no amount of success, education, or achievement would ever grant her true acceptance in their world. She was entertainment, a curiosity to be mocked and dismissed when the novelty wore thin. Maya's reflection in the marble floor stared back at her, fractured, distorted, broken into 1,000 pieces by the weight of their hatred. The foundation didn't just crack. It shattered completely. Maya fled through the mansion's French doors into the sprawling garden, her heels clicking against flagstone paths that wound between sculpted hedges and marble fountains. The night air bit at her exposed shoulders, but she welcomed the cold, anything to numb the fire burning in her chest. Ornamental roses lined the walkways, their thorns catching moonlight like tiny daggers, beautiful and dangerous in equal measure. She collapsed onto a stone bench beneath an ancient oak, its branches creating a canopy of shadows that offered the privacy she desperately needed. The mansion's golden windows glowed behind her like watching eyes, but here in the darkness, she could finally let her mask slip. The tears came without permission, hot and angry against her cheeks. Each sob carried the weight of every classroom where she had been the only black face, every boardroom where her ideas were dismissed until a white colleague repeated them, every social gathering where she was treated like an exotic curiosity rather than a human being. She was 7 years old again, watching her classmates' parents pull their children away during playdates. 12. Listening to teachers express surprise at her academic excellence, as if intelligence was somehow incompatible with her skin color. 16. Hearing guidance counselors suggest more realistic college choices, despite her perfect grades. Her father's voice echoed across the years. Maya, baby, the world will try to make you smaller. Don't let them. But remember, you'll have to work twice as hard to get half the recognition. That's not fair, but it's reality. Marcus Richardson had built his tech empire from a one-bedroom apartment, coding through nights while working 3 jobs to support his family. He had warned her about rooms like tonight's, about people who would smile to her face while sharpening knives behind her back. But knowing the game existed didn't make playing it any less exhausting. Maya's phone trembled in her hands as she dialed his number, muscle memory guiding her fingers through tears that blurred her vision. Maya, how's the gala going, sweetheart? His voice carried the warmth of someone who had spent 27 years being her safe harbor in storms exactly like this one. Maya tried to steady her breathing, to summon the composure that had carried her through Harvard, through corporate boardrooms, through a lifetime of proving her worth to people who would never see it. It's fine, Dad. Just wanted to check in. The silence stretched between them, filled with everything she couldn't say and everything he already understood. Marcus Richardson hadn't built a billion-dollar company by missing subtleties. He heard the tremor in her voice, the careful control that meant she was barely holding together. Maya. His voice dropped to the tone he used when she was small and the world had been cruel. What happened? The question broke something inside her, and the words tumbled out like water through a broken dam. She told him about the Whitmores, about the sitting room, about watching her humanity dissected for entertainment while others stood by in complicit silence. They don't see me as a person, Dad. I'm just a thing to them, a diversity hire, a charity case. No matter what I accomplish, I'll never be anything more than that in their eyes. Marcus's breathing grew heavy on the other end of the line. Maya could picture him in his home office, jaw clenched, mind already calculating responses. He had faced his own battles with the Whitmores of the world, but hearing his daughter's pain awakened something primal and protective. "Baby girl," he said quietly, "some people mistake kindness for weakness. They're about to learn the difference." The sound of gravel crunching under tires announced Marcus Richardson's arrival 30 minutes after Maya's tearful call. His black Bentley glided up the circular driveway like a predator approaching prey, its headlights cutting through the darkness with surgical precision. The valet who approached the vehicle moved with the deference reserved for true power, not inherited wealth, but the kind of influence that could reshape industries with a single decision. Marcus emerged from the car with the fluid grace of someone who had learned to command rooms through presence alone. At 52, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who had built an empire from nothing and defended it against every attempt to tear it down. His tailored tuxedo fit like armor, and his dark eyes held the calculating intensity of someone who had spent decades turning disadvantage into dominance. The mansion's golden light spilled across the driveway as he approached, but Marcus felt no warmth from its glow. He had attended countless galas like this one, had written checks to causes that made wealthy people feel virtuous while changing nothing fundamental about the systems that oppressed others. Tonight, however, he wasn't here for charity. He was here for justice. Inside, the party continued its elaborate dance of privilege and pretense. Conversations paused as Marcus entered, recognition rippling through the crowd like electricity. Forbes covers and business magazines had made his face familiar to anyone who mattered in corporate America, but his presence here was unexpected. Marcus Richardson didn't typically grace social events. He was known for his laser focus on business and his reluctance to play the networking games that others found essential. Maya spotted him immediately, relief flooding her features as she moved toward him through the crowd. But Marcus held up a subtle hand, his eyes conveying a message she understood instantly. "Let me observe first." He needed to see the battlefield before engaging the enemy. From his position near the entrance, Marcus watched the Whitmores hold court in their sitting room, their voices carrying with the careless cruelty of people who believe themselves untouchable. Victoria was in the middle of another performance, her audience hanging on every word as she dissected the evening's guests with surgical precision. "That Richardson girl thinks she's so sophisticated." Victoria's voice drifted across the marble foyer. "But you can see right through the facade. New money always tries too hard." Bradley nodded enthusiastically, emboldened by his mother's approval. "Father says their whole company is probably built on government contracts and diversity quotas. Affirmative action success story." Marcus felt his jaw tighten, but his expression remained neutral. He had learned long ago that the most dangerous predators were the ones who appeared calm before they struck. Around the sitting room, other guests murmured agreement or remained strategically silent, their complicity as damaging as active participation. Charles Whitmore noticed Marcus first, his businessman's instincts recognizing power even when he couldn't immediately place its source. He approached with the confident stride of someone accustomed to being the most important person in any room. "I don't believe we've met." Charles extended his hand with practiced charm. "Charles Whitmore, welcome to our home." Marcus accepted the handshake, his grip firm but not aggressive. "Marcus Richardson, thank you for having me." The name hit Charles like a physical blow. His face went through a series of micro-expressions: confusion, recognition, and finally dawning horror. The blood drained from his cheeks as he realized that the man standing before him wasn't just another wealthy guest. He was the father of the woman his family had spent the evening destroying, the CEO whose company represented their future, the architect of their potential salvation or destruction. "Richardson." Charles's voice cracked slightly. "You're Maya's father," Marcus finished, his tone carrying the weight of mountains. "And I believe we need to talk." The reckoning had begun. Dawn broke over the city like a blade, its light cutting through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Marcus Richardson's corner office on the 42nd floor. The skyline stretched endlessly before him, a testament to human ambition and the power of those bold enough to seize it. But this morning, Marcus wasn't admiring the view. He was orchestrating the systematic dismantling of everything Charles Whitmore had built. The previous night's confrontation had been brief but definitive. Charles had stammered through apologies and explanations, his face cycling through shades of panic as he realized the magnitude of his family's mistake. But Marcus had listened with the cold precision of a surgeon examining a malignant tumor, his decision already made before the first word of contrition left Charles's lips. "Sir," his assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "Legal is ready with the withdrawal documents." Marcus pressed the button with deliberate calm. "Send them in." The merger documents that had taken months to negotiate were reduced to ash in minutes. $500 million in potential revenue, gone with the stroke of a pen. But this wasn't about money. It was about sending a message that would echo through every boardroom in the country. Some lines, once crossed, could never be uncrossed. Maya sat across from her father's desk, watching him work with the methodical efficiency of someone who had spent decades turning disadvantage into dominance. She had seen him negotiate billion-dollar deals, had watched him outmaneuver competitors who underestimated the quiet kid from Detroit who had coded his way to the top. But this was different. This was personal. "The press release goes out in 10 minutes, Marcus said, his fingers dancing across his tablet with surgical precision. "Richardson Tech is withdrawing from all negotiations with Whitmore Industries, citing fundamental differences in corporate values and commitment to diversity and inclusion." The words carried weight beyond their simple meaning. In the interconnected world of corporate America, reputation was currency, and Marcus had just declared the Whitmores bankrupt. Within hours, the news would spread through business networks like wildfire, carried by journalists, analysts, and competitors who understood the subtext of his carefully chosen language. Maya's phone buzzed with the first notification, a Bloomberg alert that would soon be followed by dozens more. The business world moved at the speed of information, and information traveled faster than light in the digital age. "Dad, are you sure about this?" Maya's voice carried concern, not for the Whitmores, but for the potential backlash her father might face. "They'll try to spin this, make it about business rather than—" "Let them try," Marcus interrupted, his tone carrying the quiet confidence of someone who had faced down bigger enemies than the Whitmores. "I've been fighting battles like this since before you were born, baby girl. The difference is now I have the power to win them." Charles Whitmore's first call came at 7:23 a.m., followed by 17 more over the next 2 hours. Marcus let each one go to voicemail, the desperation in Charles's voice growing more pronounced with each unanswered attempt. Apologies turned to explanations, explanations to justifications, justifications to barely concealed threats about mutual business relationships and shared connections. But Marcus had anticipated every move. His legal team had spent the night reviewing contracts, identifying potential vulnerabilities, and preparing for the corporate warfare that was about to unfold. Other companies that had witnessed the Whitmores' behavior were already distancing themselves, their own legal departments recognizing the liability of association with documented racism. Richardson Tech's withdrawal has triggered a domino effect, Maya read from her tablet, scrolling through the morning's business news. 3 other major partners are reassessing their relationships with Whitmore Industries. Marcus nodded, unsurprised. He had built his empire on the principle that character mattered as much as capital, that long-term success required more than quarterly profits. The business community was finally learning what he had always known, that tolerance for intolerance was a luxury they could no longer afford. Maya watched her father work, understanding for the first time that his success wasn't just about building wealth. It was about building power, the kind of power that could protect people like her, that could demand accountability from those who thought themselves untouchable, that could transform pain into purpose. The Whitmores had awakened something they couldn't control, and the consequences were just beginning. The consequences cascaded through the Whitmore empire like water through a cracked dam, each breach creating new fractures that spread with devastating speed. By noon, 3 more companies had severed ties with Whitmore Industries, their press releases carefully worded but unmistakably clear. The language of corporate diplomacy couldn't disguise the underlying message. Association with documented racism had become a liability no board of directors could afford. Charles Whitmore sat in his mahogany-paneled office, watching his life's work disintegrate in real time. Stock prices plummeted as investors fled. their confidence shattered by the revelation that the company's leadership harbored the kind of prejudices that could trigger lawsuits, boycotts, and regulatory scrutiny. His assistant fielded calls from panicked board members, each conversation more desperate than the last. "Sir, the Washington Post is requesting comment on the Richardson Tech withdrawal." His assistant's voice trembled through the intercom. "And there's a video circulating on social media." The video had appeared on Twitter at 10:47 a.m., uploaded by someone who had attended the gala. 43 seconds of Victoria and Bradley's cruel performance, their voices crystal clear as they mocked Maya's appearance and questioned her intelligence. The footage had been shared thousands of times within hours, each retweet carrying the hashtag Whitmore racism and commentary that ranged from outrage to disgusted. Victoria's phone had been ringing nonstop since the video surfaced. Country club memberships were being reviewed, charity board positions quietly rescinded, social invitations mysteriously withdrawn. The same women who had laughed at her cruel jokes the night before now refused to take her calls, their own reputations too precious to risk contamination by association. Bradley faced his own reckoning as his law firm's partners called an emergency meeting. Corporate clients were already expressing concerns about his judgment and character, questioning whether someone who could display such blatant racism in public could be trusted to represent their interests. His carefully cultivated image as a rising star in corporate law was crumbling faster than he could rebuild it. "This is insane," Bradley raged to his father over the phone. "It was just a party. People say things at parties. Since when is that a crime?" "Since those people started recording everything and posting it online," Charles replied, his voice hollow with defeat. "Since companies started caring more about their image than their profits." But the damage extended beyond business relationships and social standing. Maya discovered that several guests who had witnessed the Whitmores' behavior were now speaking out, their guilt over their initial silence transforming into vocal advocacy. Jennifer Walsh, who had made her own subtle digs at Maya earlier in the evening, published a LinkedIn post acknowledging her complicity and committing to do better. "I stood by and said nothing while a brilliant young woman was humiliated in front of me," Jennifer wrote. "My silence made me complicit in racism, and I'm ashamed of my cowardice. We must do better." The post garnered thousands of likes and comments, sparking conversations about bystander responsibility and the courage required to confront racism in real time. Other guests began sharing their own experiences, creating a groundswell of support for Maya and accountability for the Whitmores. Maya read each message with a mixture of gratitude and sadness. The support felt genuine, but it came only after the consequences had already fallen. She wondered how many other victims of racism had suffered in silence because witnesses lacked the courage to speak up when it mattered most. The ripples were spreading far beyond the Whitmore family, touching every corner of their interconnected world and forcing a reckoning that had been decades in the making. 6 months after the Whitmore Gala, Maya stood at the podium of the National Diversity in Tech Conference, facing an audience of 2,000 professionals whose faces reflected every shade of the human spectrum. The convention center's soaring glass ceiling filtered afternoon sunlight into golden streams that illuminated the sea of expectant faces below. This was her moment, not as a victim of racism, but as a voice for change. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. In the weeks following the gala, Maya had wrestled with anger, pain, and the temptation to retreat from spaces where her humanity was questioned. But gradually, the fire that had burned in her chest that night had transformed from destructive rage into purposeful determination. She would not allow the Whitmores' cruelty to diminish her. Instead, she would use it as fuel to light the way for others. "I want to tell you about a night when I learned that our success threatens people who mistake privilege for superiority," Maya began, her voice carrying across the silent auditorium. "But more importantly, I want to tell you about what we do with that knowledge." The audience leaned forward, recognizing the courage it took to transform personal trauma into public advocacy. Maya's story had become legend in corporate circles, not just for the dramatic downfall of the Whitmores, but for the way she had refused to let their hatred define her narrative. Richardson Tech had become a beacon for ethical business practices, attracting partners who valued integrity alongside innovation. Companies that had once overlooked Marcus Richardson's firm now sought them out, recognizing that sustainable success required more than quarterly profits. It demanded moral leadership. The merger deals that replaced the Whitmore partnership were worth twice as much and aligned with values that could withstand public scrutiny. My father taught me that power without purpose is just noise. Maya continued, her eyes finding familiar faces in the crowd. Young professionals of color she had mentored, scholarship recipients from the program she had helped establish, allies who had found their voices after witnessing her courage. But when we use our platforms to lift others, we create something that can't be destroyed by hatred or ignorance. The Richardson Foundation Scholarship Program had already funded education for 50 underrepresented students, each recipient carrying forward the message that excellence and integrity were not mutually exclusive. Maya personally mentored 12 young professionals, sharing not just career advice, but the emotional tools needed to navigate spaces where their presence was questioned. The Whitmores thought they could diminish me by refusing to see my humanity. Maya's voice grew stronger with each word. But my worth was never theirs to determine. It belongs to me, to my family, to everyone who sees my true value, and to every person in this room who refuses to let others define their potential. The standing ovation began in the front rows and swept backward like a wave, 2,000 people rising to their feet in recognition of a truth that transcended individual experience. Maya had transformed her pain into power, her humiliation into hope, her isolation into inspiration. As the applause thundered around her, Maya felt the final pieces of her healing click into place. The Whitmores had tried to break her, but instead they had forged her into something stronger. A leader who understood that true victory wasn't about destroying enemies, but about building a world where such enemies could no longer thrive. The ashes of that terrible night had become the foundation for something beautiful and unbreakable.